Welcome to the Rum Revival. My name's Arminder, and today we're talking about this new Venezuelan rum right here. This is the Santa Teresa 1796 Arabica Coffee Cask Finish. And since we're talking about this release, I figured it would also be a good opportunity to talk about this rum right here. This is the other release in Santa Teresa's Cask Finish series. This is the Speyside Whisky Finish. But in order to talk about this rum and this rum right here, we really need to talk about this rum here first. This is the standard 1796 from Santa Teresa. See, these two rums here pretty much start their lives as this rum before going through a secondary maturation or finishing. So, to truly understand these rums, we really need to dive into this one first. So I'm really excited to be talking about the OG 1796 because it goes through a fairly involved aging process with multiple different stages, and I actually find that production of the rum fairly fascinating, so I want to really dive into that and kind of get a little nerdy about it. So first and foremost, this is a molasses-based rum, and Santa Teresa actually sources some of the molasses used to make this rum from their very own sugar factory. Now with the molasses, Santa Teresa makes a couple of different rums. And in fact, the 1796 is a blend of 3 different rums. First, there's a light calm still rum that goes through a short 14-hour fermentation and is distilled to 95% ABV, so it's pretty light in flavor. Then there are 2 heavy rums, both of which go through a 14-day fermentation and include the use of acid for creating a lot more flavor compounds. Now one of those heavy rums is calm distilled to just 75% ABV, which means it retains much more of the flavors created during fermentation and of the molasses, and the other heavy rum is a double pot distilled rum that comes out of the still at 83% ABV. After distillation, each of those rums is diluted down to 65% ABV and then aged separately for 4 years in ex-bourbon casks. Now, after that time, each of those 3 rums are added in a specific ratio to a large blending vat made from French Limousin oak. Now, there's no real information out there on the exact breakdown of the blend of the ratio, but if I had to guess, there's probably more of that lighter calm still rum in here than anything else. Now from there, that blended rum is put through Santa Teresa's Solera system for additional aging. Now Solera aging is a common practice when it comes to aging sherry, for example, and it's essentially the practice of blending and aging together younger and older rums and cascading them through different sets of barrels that contain older and older rum. Now I think that sort of made sense, but let's break it down a little further. Now Santa Teresa's Solera system was started in 1992 and has 4 levels, meaning that there are 4 levels of casks stacked on top of one another. Now the topmost casks have the youngest rum in them. In this case, that would be that blend of 3 different rums that were aged separately for 4 years in ex-bourbon and then were vatted together. We would take that and add that to the topmost level. And then each level of casks below that top level would have some amount of progressively older rum in it. And when it comes time to bottle up the 1796, half of the rum from each cask on the bottom level is taken out and blended together in an American oak vat, and it's diluted down to 40% ABV and then bottled up. But because that bottom level of casks is now half empty, that creates a bit of a chain reaction where rum from each higher level is used to refill the level below it. So with the bottommost level now half empty, we take half of the rum from the level above it, level 3, which contains a younger blend of those rums, and blend it into level 4. But now that third level is half empty, so we have to repeat that process by taking rums from level 2 and adding it into level 3. But because now level 2 is half empty, we have to refill it with younger stock of rums from level 1. Now, that topmost level of casks is half empty or half full, depending on how you're looking at it, and we need to fill it up with something, but there's no other set of casks above it, so we take those 3 rums that were aging separately, that were blended together, and we use that to fill up those top level of casks. So given that all of these levels of casks have never really been fully emptied, in each level you've got a blend of young and potentially very, very old rum. So when you take out the rums from that bottommost level to bottle up, in theory, each bottle contains some amount of that mother rum from 1992 that was used to start the Solera system. Now, how much of it is actually in a bottle? I have no idea, but I imagine it's not a whole lot. Say what you will about the Solera system of aging, but props to Santa Teresa for not saying like 4 to 35 years of aging on their label. I think that might be a little misleading to consumers. What I like is that literally on the label, they just say Solera rum, right? That's all they say when it comes to aging on the front label. Now, I think most consumers might not have any idea what that means, but they're not working under the assumption that there's a lot of like 35-year-old rum in here. So that's something. Oh, and one other thing, each bottle has some sugar added to it. Now, according to Santa Teresa's website, it's less than 3 grams of sugar per bottle. Now, some folks have done their own hydrometer tests that show results that align with that. But I've seen other folks claim that they've done tests and it shows anywhere from 7 to 12 grams per bottle. So who really knows? I mean, besides Santa Teresa, I don't know, but we can at least safely assume that some amount of sugar has been added. So that's the rum in a fairly large nutshell. Let's give it a try. So on the nose, there are two primary notes that really kind of stick out, that really kind of grab my attention, at least initially. And it's a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of cherry. Stewed down dark cherries mixed in with some cinnamon syrup. But there is also kind of very familiar notes of caramels here, as well as some chocolates. So I'm getting up front primarily cinnamon on the palate, but it's kind of softened by notes of vanilla, caramel, richer notes of vanilla, caramel, some chocolates, some brown sugars. Now the problem is all those kind of flavors are only there initially, up front, like maybe the first 20 to 25% of its journey on the palate, because the back end and the finish is pretty light and faint. Like it doesn't really, in my opinion, leave you with any kind of lasting impression. It kind of hits a certain point on the palate and poof, it's gone, right? Like it's a bit of a disappointing finish in that there's not a whole lot of finish at all. As you really get into sipping rums neat, or really any spirit neat, I think you at some point come to realize the importance or impact of the finish on your overall experience, right? It's the thing that stays with you between sips. It's like an echo or a lingering impression. And it's the thing that makes you want to go back for another sip. And frankly, I think it's the thing that you'll remember more than anything else about the rum well after drinking it. So with this not having much of a finish, I feel like I'm not really getting a full experience, which frankly isn't like a knock solely on the 1796. It's really often the case with most rums that are bottled at 40% ABV. There's just not a whole lot there. That being said, up front, those flavors of cinnamon, vanilla, caramel, they're all comforting. They're familiar, they're warm, they're like a nice big hug from a grandparent, right? And for a lot of people, those are the flavors that they're looking for, not just in a rum, but just in any kind of spirit. So because of that, this is a rum that I'd recommend to people wanting to dip their toes into rum, but who aren't like already big spirit drinkers. Like if you're coming from the high proof bourbon world, there's not a whole lot here to kind of keep you engaged. So that is the OG 1796. So with this rum in mind, let's see how it tastes finished in two different cask types. And let's start off with the Speyside Whisky Cask Finish. So after the Solera aging and vat blending, the 1796 is aged for at least 13 months in Speyside whiskey casks. Now they don't go into which distillery from the Speyside region of Scotland those casks are from. I mean, maybe that information is out there, but I wasn't able to find it. Now, the notable thing about this finish and the Arabica Coffee Cask Finish is that they're both bottled at 46% ABV instead of 40%, which I think is great. Obviously, whenever I can have more ABV, I'm a happy camper. So with all that information out of the way, let's give this a try. So on the nose, I'm getting some of that cinnamon that I was getting in the 1796, but I'm also getting a little bit of feet. Yeah, feet. Lovely. Now, if you can get past that smell of feet, what I do also pick up is a little bit of like rotten or spoiled chocolate. Oh. Okay, honestly, all I'm really getting right now is this note of like smoke. But it's not just smoke, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an acrid smoke. See, when I first tried this, I felt like it was just plain nasty. That acrid note was just too intense or sharp for me. Now, after having tried it a couple times, I'd say it's like less nasty and maybe more unpleasant. And you know, there is a difference between nasty and unpleasant, right? Anyways, it's maybe like slightly campfire-esque, I guess, if I'm feeling kind of generous, I guess. And I guess I just don't really enjoy that acrid campfire smoke taste or finish. It kind of just dominates the rum. Though, that being said, you do briefly get some notes of vanilla, some caramel, some brown sugar. But what you're not getting from the original is a whole lot of that cinnamon. At least I'm not. Before any of those flavors or the cinnamon kind of manifest, that smoke kind of rears its head around. And it kind of aggressively yanks you in a whole different direction. And even though I hate to describe it as smoky, I love mezcal, but I also understand there's more to mezcal than just smoky, but I like it a lot. So it's not like I'm against some of those kind of roasted, toasted, smoky flavors. Though I will confess to not really being a fan of Scotch. It's just not a flavor profile that I can get into. And it's not just like peated Scotch either. I kind of just don't like Scotch in general. And look, I'm sure there's a Scotch out there for me, just as there's a rum out there for you, blah, 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 blah. But hey, this isn't the Scotch revival. Now I'm curious though, if I was into Scotch, would I feel differently about this rum? If you're watching and you're a Scotch head and you've had this rum and you like it, let me know by leaving a comment down below. I'm seriously curious. Now, I won't paint all Scotch finished rums with the same brush, but this rum right here, it's just not for me. I kind of dislike it. Okay, so let's move on to the newest release, the Arabica Coffee Cask Finish. Here, the 1796 is finished for 3 months in American white oak casks that were previously used to age a rum-based cold brew coffee made from Arabica coffee beans. So there's a little bit of sharpness on the aroma, though I am getting a little bit of caramel. Though I will say that caramel almost smells like a Tootsie Roll, actually. Now there is a touch of coffee kind of aroma here, though I'm also kind of getting a little bit of raspberry, like that coffee kind of is tough to parse from like this raspberry note. And kind of underlying all of it, there is a little bit of a vegetal note that to me kind of evokes a little bit of bell pepper. So up front, this does have those notes of vanilla and caramel and brown sugar that you get in the original 1796. There is some cinnamon, but it's less. But gradually, all of those kind of give way to this building up of this like slightly roasty, but mostly sweet coffee note that kind of dominates the back end and finish. Yes, this does have coffee flavor. It's not a shy or subtle coffee at that, really. I think if you were doing like a blind tasting, you would immediately call out that this has some coffee in it or something like that. I think my real problem with this is that it doesn't have the dynamic, complex flavor of coffee that I was hoping it would, but maybe that's my issue, not the rums. That being said, I'm not saying that this is artificial tasting. I'm not. It's just that the coffee note is a little kind of one note. And frankly, it's also just a touch too sweet for my palate. That being said, it's not cloying, but if on one end we had like black coffee and the other end we had a latte, this would be like 1 or 2 clicks in the direction of a latte. And I absolutely hate milk in my coffee, so yeah. The thing is, even at the higher proof, this tastes sweeter than the original 40% ABV 1796. And I thought I read somewhere that they added more sugar to balance out maybe some of the coffee notes, but in doing my research for this video, I couldn't find that anywhere online anymore, so I might have just made that up. But real talk, this just tastes and feels just a touch sweeter. Not significantly sweeter, but just a touch. I guess this just isn't something that I would be all that excited to drink on a daily basis. The coffee and the slight sweetness would just be a bit too much for me. But as an occasional thing to sip a little bit on every now and again, yeah, I actually could get behind it in that scenario when the mood strikes me. All right, so with having tasted all 3 of these rums, what do I think? Well, between the 2 of them, I think I clearly prefer the Arabica Coffee Cask Finish. That Speyside is just not a pleasant experience for me. Now, with regards to the Arabica finish, sure, I think it is the better sipping rum, but whether you like it or not will depend on, one, if you like the taste of coffee, because if you don't like the taste of coffee, I can't imagine that you'd be really into the rum. Plus, you also have to be down with a little bit of sweetness. Now, if you're into all of that, then sure, I think you might like it. Now, if I'm being completely honest, given the choice, and even with the lower ABV, I think I'd rather drink the regular 1796. And yes, the finish is lacking, but up front, there's enough layers of comforting flavors that I think I'd rather sip on this than not have to deal with the acrid smokiness of this rum and then that slight extra perceived sweetness of this rum. Frankly, I'd rather the folks at Santa Teresa just release a version of 1796 that's 46% ABV. Forget about all that wacky cask finishing and all that. Just give me more of what works. Now that's where I land on these rums. Neat, but I think to really give them a fair shake, we kind of need to see how they hold up in a couple of different drinks. So I'm going to make a couple drinks with these and be right back. So for the first cocktail, I made some rum old fashioned. So we'll start off with the original 1796 and see how it tastes. Cheers. Good. Definitely pretty forward on the combination of the bitters and like the cinnamon and the baking spices really get kind of enhanced in here. Doesn't feel heavy, doesn't feel like mouth coating. That's a product of the low ABV. But it is a very sippable old fashioned, but it's definitely missing stuff on the back end. Let's try now the Speyside Whisky Finish, which I'm a little hesitant to try, but let's see how it goes. Cheers. Okay, so already love how much fuller this one is on the palate than this one. That's for sure. A big part of that, of course, is that 46% ABV. I think I enjoy this much more in the old fashioned than I do neat. I think the dilution, the bitters, the demerara syrup help kind of spread out and loosen up that tight, balled up, acrid smoke, so it becomes a little more palatable for me. Let's see how the Arabica Coffee Cask does in an old fashioned. Cheers. Wow, that took the coffee that when it was neat was it was building up to a coffee note, and the coffee really kind of started flourishing midway through. Here the coffee is fully kind of in your face right away. So this is like a touch sweet to me, right? The rum itself was kind of a little touch sweet, and then the use of the demerara gum syrup is really kind of heightening that sweetness for me. I'm gonna go with the Speyside Whisky Cask Finish as my favorite old fashioned. It just has a great combination of body, of booziness. That smoke note now, I don't hate as much. I think it really works really well here. It serves as a counterbalance to the sweetness of the demerara gum syrup here. Alrighty, so next up we have a couple of Manhattans, and we'll start off with the original 1796. Cheers. That's good, that's tasty. You definitely get a good amount of the vermouth shining through here, and that's a product of the rum being 40% ABV. I have made plenty of 1796 Manhattans, and I enjoy them. But the rum here is not dominating. All right, let's move on to the Speyside Whisky Cask. Cheers. Okay. All right. So, unlike with the first one, given the higher proof, this is far more rum forward. The vermouth is definitely playing a bit of a back seat here. And on the palate, the smoke is much more of an accent than it is a dominant note. That smoke kind of really integrates so well with the vermouth that it really enhances some of the kind of rich dark fruit notes, dried fruit notes that are apparent in the rum and in the Manhattan. Just kind of elevates it all. Super tasty, super delicious. And then, of course, the last one is the Arabica Coffee Cask Finish. Cheers. Up front, the first part of the sip, the coffee tasted more like bell pepper, which was a note that I kind of picked up on the aroma and a little bit on the palate, but primarily on the aroma, kind of like a vegetable note. The sweetness isn't as bad here as it was in the old fashioned. That felt a little too sweet. Here, I just feel like the smoke is so well integrated with the vermouth and the bitters, and because of the dilution, it just feels like more of a complete experience, like a complete package. It doesn't feel like there's this extra thing tacked on, versus here, that coffee does feel like it's a bit tacked on. It's good. It's not a bad Manhattan at all, but this just feels more cohesive and kind of singular. Like, singular? Yeah, let's go with singular. Okay, so for our final cocktail, I went with some Espresso Martinis. I was intrigued by the idea to see how a coffee rum does in an Espresso Martini and how a smoky rum does in an Espresso Martini. So that's what we've got right here, and we'll start off with the original 1796. Cheers. That's tasty. It kind of tastes like melted coffee ice cream, which is never a bad thing. But frankly, I don't taste a whole lot of rum. I like to taste rum in my cocktails, so I'm hoping these ones with the higher proof will have a little bit more of that. Let's see how a little smoke does with the Speyside Whisky Cask Finish. Cheers. Yeah, all right. There you go. It kind of starts off in that vein of like the melted coffee ice cream, but there's just a little bit more of a presence of that smoke. The smoke is not aggressive like it is neat. If I want dessert, I'd reach for this, but when I actually want an actual cocktail, this is more what I'm looking for. And then, of course, lastly is going to be the Arabica Coffee Cask Finish. I'm intrigued is the idea of adding coffee or a coffee finished rum into an espresso martini, is that just overkill? Will the coffee kind of get lost? Will it become the ultimate espresso martini? We'll find out. Cheers. It's fine. It's not bad, but it's not a revelation. I don't feel like, though, that adding coffee to your coffee is enhancing this, making this like the best espresso martini. Yeah, so ultimately I'm gonna go again with the Speyside Whisky Cask Finish. I just think that smoke adds enough of a accent to the experience, a bit of a counterbalance to some of the sweetness that's inherent in an espresso martini. Again, 3 out of 3 for the Speyside Whisky Finish, but across the board for espresso martinis, I would be happy with any one of them, frankly, but I just think for me, this is the overall better experience. So I think the big takeaway for me for having tried these rums neat and then trying them in cocktails was that you kind of need to do that. You need to try a rum in a number of different applications, right? But trying them in 3 different cocktails gave me a broader sense or bigger sense of what these rums can do. And clearly, I think the Speyside Whisky Cask was the biggest surprise because of that, right? And I would have, and I did absolutely dismiss this rum because I didn't really care for it as a neat sipper. But now I do not regret this purchase at all anymore, and I could see myself buying another bottle to make cocktails with, because I do think it adds something unique, and it does change up those cocktails and create versions of those cocktails that I enjoy. So I would say this, right? I'd say try the 2 cask finishes at a bar first, if you can, or get your hands on a sample, because they are fairly out there in terms of like flavor, right? And even if you like Scotch or coffee, they might not be your jam. Or they might, I don't know what your mouth really likes, or do I? And if you're watching this and you're new or relatively new to rum, then I'd recommend giving the regular old 1796 a shot. It's fairly easy to find, it's around $40, and it's flavorful but not particularly challenging, and it's easy drinking enough to be like a daily sipper. Now, are there other better rums out there? Sure, of course, but as your first, second, or third or fourth bottle, I think there's a good chance you'll find enough here to kind of keep you coming back, at least for a while. And when you're ready for something a bit more, well, come and talk to your boy Arminder. All right, so that's my deep dive into all 3 of these rums. Now, I'm curious, do you like Scotch finish rums or coffee finish rums? Is there a different type of finish that you really like? Let me know by leaving a comment down below. Now, if you're interested in checking out some exclusive behind the scenes content and first impressions video where I try rum for the very first time and give my gut reaction to it, then consider checking out and supporting me on my Patreon. I have tons of content there that I think you'll really like. Thanks so much for watching. Catch y'all next time. Cheers.